This newly released interrogation footage pulls back the curtain on a case that stunned an entire community. It centers on a teenager accused of murdering his own mother and stepfather inside their quiet suburban home, then living alongside their bodies for nearly 2 weeks before attempting to flee the country. Alongside the video, investigators have also released hundreds of previously unseen crime scene photographs, each one documenting the disturbing aftermath left behind. This is the case of Nikita Casup. At first glance, nothing about Nikita's life suggested violence. He lived in a spacious home on a peaceful cul-de-sac in Waukesha County, Wisconsin. He traveled internationally with his family, earned strong grades, and was even recognized as a student of the month at his high school. Teachers described him as polite, motivated, and focused on his future. But behind that carefully maintained image, prosecutors say, was something far darker. According to investigators, Nikita fatally shot both his mother, Tatiana Casup, and his stepfather, Donald Mayer, inside their home in February 2025. Rather than immediately fleeing or calling for help, authorities believe he stayed inside the house with their bodies for roughly 2 weeks, carefully planning his next move. The interrogation video released by the Waukesha County Sheriff's Office begins not with accusations, but with calm conversation. When detectives first sit down with the 17-year-old on March 11, 2025, they don't confront him with evidence. Instead, they make small talk. They ask about his background. They bring him food. Nikita eats quietly, appearing relaxed, almost detached from the gravity of why he's there. This calm demeanor is striking. At this point, Nikita has already been arrested in rural Kansas and transported back to Wisconsin. Law enforcement believes he was in the middle of a multi-state escape attempt, one that may have eventually led him out of the United States entirely. Court records reveal that Nikita's alleged plan was to reach Ukraine, where he believed he could live freely, beyond the reach of U.S. authorities. But that plan unraveled when police tracked his movements across several states using cell phone data and license plate information. Rather than immediately questioning him about the killings, detectives start by asking about his upbringing. Nikita tells them he was born in Moldova in 2007 and lived there until he was around 10 years old. His mother later met Donald Mayer online, and after years of long-distance travel and visits across Europe, they married. In 2017, Nikita moved with his mother to the United States to begin a new life. By his own account, Nikita adjusted well. He did well in school, joined clubs, and talked about plans to study engineering in college. He even began the process of joining the National Honor Society. Nothing about his school record suggested trouble. In fact, his attendance had been perfect, which later became a key red flag. Investigators say concern first rose when Nikita stopped showing up to school entirely. After 2 weeks of unexplained absences, school officials contacted law enforcement. At the same time, Donald Mayer's family in Massachusetts grew worried after receiving strange text messages from his phone. Messages claimed he was sick and taking a break from communication, behavior that family members said was completely out of character. Those concerns led to a welfare check at the home on Cider Hills Drive. When deputies entered the house on February 28, 2025, they made a horrifying discovery. Donald Mayer was found dead in a first-floor office, shot in the head. Tatiana Casup was discovered in a hallway. Both bodies were covered with blankets. There were no signs of forced entry, and Nikita was gone. Investigators quickly realized this was no ordinary missing person case. Phones belonging to both victims were no longer in Wisconsin. Instead, data showed they had traveled hundreds of miles west. Nikita's phone revealed a similar trail, leading police across state lines as they raced to locate him. What they would soon uncover, both inside the house and inside Nikita's vehicle, would paint a chilling picture of premeditation, concealment, and an escape plan that stretched far beyond Wisconsin. And this was only the beginning. When investigators stepped inside the Casup home on Cider Hills Drive, the silence told its own story. The house itself was well kept, large and situated in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing out of the ordinary was ever expected to happen. But what deputies found inside would haunt the case from that moment forward. Donald Mayer's body was discovered first. He had been shot in the head and was found inside a home office on the first floor. The room showed no signs of a struggle. A blanket had been carefully placed over his body, and nearby were pillows arranged in a way that suggested someone had tried to conceal what lay beneath. Not far away, investigators found Tatiana Casup's body in a hallway. She too had been shot. Like Donald, her body was covered. The placement of the blankets immediately raised alarms. This wasn't panic. This wasn't a chaotic crime scene. It appeared deliberate. As deputies moved through the house, more unsettling details emerged. Candles were found positioned near Donald's body. According to investigators, these candles were likely used to mask the smell of decomposition, a grim indication that whoever committed the killings had remained inside the home long after the murders occurred. Court documents would later confirm what authorities had begun to suspect. Nikita Casup had continued living in the house for nearly 2 weeks after killing his mother and stepfather. During that time, prosecutors say, he did not seek help. Instead, he planned. Meanwhile, outside the home, concern had been building. Donald Mayer's family in Massachusetts had grown increasingly uneasy after receiving strange text messages from his phone. The messages claimed Donald was sick and stepping away from social media. Family members said this behavior was completely uncharacteristic. Donald was known to be reliable, communicative, and close with his relatives. At nearly the same time, Nikita's high school noticed something else that didn't make sense. Nikita, who had maintained perfect attendance throughout the year, suddenly stopped coming to school. No excuse calls were made, no emails were sent. 2 weeks passed with no explanation. Those two concerns, the strange messages and the unexplained school absences, ultimately triggered the welfare check that led police to the bodies. But Nikita was already gone.
Once deputies realized he was missing, the investigation shifted into a multi-state search. Detectives began analyzing cell phone data from all 3 phones, Nikita's, his mother's, and his stepfather's. What they found confirmed their worst fears. None of the phones were still in Wisconsin. Records showed that Donald and Tatiana's phones had traveled west and were eventually located in Wyoming, roughly 15 hours away from their home. Investigators determined this was not a technical error. The phones had physically been taken there and discarded. Nikita's phone told a similar story. His location data placed him in Iowa, specifically at a massive truck stop in Walcott. From there, police continued tracking his movements, coordinating with law enforcement agencies across multiple states. Eventually, officers in Kansas were alerted. That coordination paid off. Nikita Casup was located at a gas station in the small town of Waukene, Kansas. Parked at one of the pumps was Donald Mayer's Volkswagen Atlas, the same vehicle neighbors had seen Nikita driving days earlier, despite the fact that he did not have a valid driver's license. When officers approached and took Nikita into custody, what they found inside the vehicle would dramatically strengthen the case against him. In plain view was a Smith & Wesson handgun. Investigators also found ammunition consistent with that weapon. Back at the Wisconsin home, deputies had already discovered an empty gun case that matched the same firearm, a gun known to belong to Donald Mayer. But that was only the beginning. Inside the vehicle, police recovered approximately $14,000 in cash, multiple electronic devices, and dozens of pieces of jewelry later identified as belonging to Tatiana Casup. The family dog was also in the car. Perhaps most disturbing of all was a camera and memory card found among Nikita's belongings. According to the criminal complaint, the footage on that device showed Nikita inside the home after the killings. The camera appeared to have been set up in the same office where Donald's body had been found. The video showed candles burning, blankets arranged, and Nikita himself adjusting the camera, fully aware that it was recording.
In one particularly chilling moment described by investigators, Nikita reportedly held a phone close to Donald's body during a video call, showing the corpse to someone on the other end of the line. Who he was speaking to remains unclear. What was becoming increasingly evident, however, was that this was not an impulsive act. The evidence suggested planning, concealment, and a carefully thought-out escape. And as investigators began analyzing Nikita's phone data, they would uncover messages that pointed to a motive far more disturbing than anyone had initially imagined.
By the time Nikita Casup was taken into custody in Kansas, investigators already believed they understood what had happened. 2 people were dead. The evidence was overwhelming. What remained unanswered was why. And the first real clues to that question began to surface inside Nikita's phone. Once forensic analysts accessed his iPhone, they uncovered a series of messages that immediately raised alarms. In one conversation, Nikita allegedly asked how long he would need to remain hidden before being moved to Ukraine. The reply, written in Russian, suggested a timeline of 1 to 2 months. Nikita then commented that he should practice speaking Russian more fluently, adding that he could understand the language well, but struggled when speaking it. These messages were not hypothetical. They aligned closely with the physical evidence already collected: the cash, the stolen jewelry, the firearm, and the cross-country drive. Investigators now believed the road trip was not a panicked escape, but a calculated step in a larger plan. According to the criminal complaint, Nikita had discarded his parents' phones in Wyoming during the drive, likely in an attempt to sever digital ties to Wisconsin. He continued traveling south and east, eventually reaching Kansas, where he was stopped before he could continue. As authorities pieced together the timeline, they concluded that the murders likely occurred around February 11, 2025. For nearly 2 weeks afterward, Nikita remained in the house, gathering valuables, planning his route, and communicating with unknown individuals online. Among the most disturbing discoveries were videos recovered from the camera found in the car. These recordings, prosecutors say, show Nikita inside the home during the days following the killings. Candles burned nearby, blankets covered the bodies. At one point, Nikita adjusted the camera's position, demonstrating clear awareness that it was capturing everything. In another clip referenced in court documents, Nikita allegedly held a phone close to Donald Mayer's body during a live call, telling the person on the other end that they could see the body clearly. Investigators have not publicly identified who he was communicating with at that moment, nor have they confirmed whether that individual was aware of the full situation. As investigators continued reviewing his digital history, they uncovered messages that went far beyond an escape plan. According to authorities, Nikita was involved in online conversations discussing extremist ideologies, violence, and political upheaval.
These conversations, some of which occurred on platforms like Telegram and TikTok, were reportedly conducted in Russian. One username allegedly used by Nikita translated to accelerationist, a term often associated with extremist movements that advocate for chaos and the collapse of governments. The FBI became involved in the investigation after discovering references to a group known as the Order of the Nine Angles, or O9A. The group is described by law enforcement as a network promoting neo-Nazi and racially motivated extremist beliefs. According to federal authorities, O9A encourages acts of terrorism and violence as a means of accelerating societal collapse. Court documents allege that Nikita had been consuming and sharing material connected to this ideology for months prior to the murders. In December 2024, just 2 months before the killings, Nikita reportedly discussed these beliefs with another user online. In one exchange, he joked that if his parents found out, they would take his phone away, especially since the FBI had already visited his family once before. That visit, investigators say, occurred in 2023, when federal agents contacted the family regarding Nikita's online activity. The details of that interaction have not been fully disclosed, but it confirmed that law enforcement had been monitoring concerns long before the murders took place. More alarming messages surfaced from January 2025, less than a month before the killings. In one conversation, Nikita allegedly discussed a future attack, asking which country would be blamed for it. The reply suggested Russia. "This is the goal," the message stated. In another exchange, Nikita spoke about preparing a manifesto and asked whether it should be sent as a PDF so it could be distributed online without alteration. According to the FBI, a 3-page manifesto was later recovered. It allegedly outlined plans to assassinate the President of the United States as a way to trigger political chaos and ignite what Nikita described as a necessary revolution. The final page reportedly included praise for Adolf Hitler and references to white supremacist ideology. The $14,000 in cash found in the car now took on a more sinister meaning. Investigators believe Nikita intended to use that money to purchase a drone and potentially construct an improvised explosive device. Messages recovered from Telegram allegedly included discussions about drone mechanisms and explosive components, as well as protective gear for firearm use. What began as a domestic homicide investigation had now expanded into something far more complex and far more dangerous. And as Nikita was brought back to Wisconsin, detectives prepared to finally ask him the one question everyone wanted answered: why? When Nikita Casup finally sat across from detectives in Wisconsin, the weight of the evidence against him was already enormous. Law enforcement had the crime scene, they had the gun, they had the car, the cash, the jewelry, the videos, and the digital messages. What they did not have was a confession or an explanation. The interrogation began quietly. Detectives did not accuse, they did not raise their voices. Instead, they continued the same calm approach seen earlier, asking Nikita about school, his interests, and his future. He answered politely, even casually. He spoke about clubs he had joined, including volunteer organizations and a cybersecurity program. He mentioned plans for college, possibly studying engineering. At one point, he even discussed joining the National Honor Society. The contrast was unsettling. Here was a teenager accused of killing both parents, calmly discussing grades and career goals as if his life were still moving forward normally. There was no visible panic, no emotional breakdown, no outward acknowledgement of the situation he was in. Detectives slowly shifted the conversation. They reminded Nikita that he had been found far from home, in Kansas, driving his stepfather's vehicle. They explained that they believed they already knew what had happened and when. What they didn't understand, they said, was why. The lead detective was direct but measured. He told Nikita that the only person who could explain the motive was him. He emphasized that family members, including relatives in Massachusetts, were desperate for answers. Without Nikita's cooperation, investigators could only speculate. Before asking any substantive questions, detectives read Nikita his Miranda rights. He confirmed that he understood each one: the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, and the fact that anything he said could be used against him in court. When asked whether he was willing to speak without a lawyer present, Nikita hesitated. He asked a question of his own, whether he could say no. Detectives confirmed that he absolutely could. After a brief pause, Nikita chose not to continue. He said he would rather speak with an attorney first, and just like that, the interview stopped. What followed was perhaps one of the strangest moments in the entire interrogation. For nearly 2 hours, Nikita sat alone in the room. He did not speak. He did not ask questions. At one point, he requested to use the bathroom. Otherwise, he remained silent, seated, and still. Eventually, deputies returned and escorted him out. The interrogation ended without a confession, without an explanation, and without any emotional display. For investigators, the silence was telling, but it did not slow the case. Because by that point, the focus had already shifted. This was no longer just about a double homicide. It was about motive, ideology, and the possibility of future violence. As prosecutors and federal authorities dug deeper into Nikita's digital footprint, They uncovered evidence suggesting the murders may have been a means to an end, not the end itself. Investigators alleged that Nikita believed killing his parents would provide him with money, transportation, and freedom to pursue a larger plan. That plan, according to court documents, involved political violence, terrorism, and the destabilization of the U.S. government. Messages recovered from Telegram showed discussions about drones equipped with dropping mechanisms. Other conversations referenced explosives, firearms, and ways to avoid detection. There were also discussions about cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin transactions made during Nikita's cross-country drive. The FBI concluded that the murders were financially motivated, but not for personal luxury or escape alone. Prosecutors argued that the stolen money and valuables were intended to fund an attack. Authorities later revealed that Nikita's alleged goal was to assassinate the President of the United States and trigger widespread chaos. The manifesto recovered from his devices explicitly described this plan, stating that eliminating political leaders would accelerate societal collapse. For months, Nikita had reportedly immersed himself in extremist content online, communicating with like-minded individuals who encouraged violence and praised acts of terror. In that context, prosecutors say, the killings inside the Wisconsin home were a calculated step. Still, despite the mountain of evidence, Nikita never explained his reasoning in his own words to investigators. That explanation would never come in an interrogation room. Instead, it would emerge months later in a courtroom. Months after the killings, Nikita Casup stood before a Wisconsin judge, no longer the calm teenager eating fast food in an interrogation room, but an accused killer facing the reality of permanent consequences. By this point, prosecutors had made their case clear. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and a trial would expose his actions in even greater detail. Nikita ultimately chose to plead guilty. He admitted to 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide for the murders of his mother, Tatiana Casup, and his stepfather, Donald Meyer. In exchange, several additional charges, including hiding a corpse and theft-related offenses, were dismissed, but would still be considered by the court during sentencing. As the judge questioned him, Nikita answered clearly and respectfully. He confirmed that he understood the charges, the rights he was giving up, and the possible penalties. Each count carried a sentence of life imprisonment. The only question left open was whether he might one day be eligible for extended supervision, a possibility after serving decades behind bars. Unlike the interrogation footage, this courtroom appearance revealed subtle cracks in Nikita's composure. As he spoke, the chair beneath him visibly shook. His voice remained steady, but his body told a different story. The calm confidence seen earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet tension. The judge carefully reviewed Nikita's background. He confirmed that Nikita had completed 11 years of school, understood English, and had no difficulty reading or comprehending legal documents. He confirmed that Nikita was not under the influence of drugs or alcohol and was not receiving treatment for a mental illness. When asked directly whether he had committed the murders intentionally, Nikita answered yes. Yes, he used a handgun. Yes, he knew the shots would kill. Yes, he meant to do it. With those admissions, the judge formally found him guilty. After the plea, the district attorney addressed the media. He explained that the decision to avoid a trial was made in consultation with both victims' families. According to prosecutors, putting the families through months of testimony, graphic evidence, and public exposure would not serve justice any further. The prosecutor made his position clear. This was a maximum penalty case. He stated that Nikita posed an ongoing danger to the community and argued strongly against any possibility of release in the future. When asked whether Nikita could ever be rehabilitated, the answer was blunt. The state was not willing to take that risk. Another question remained unresolved.
whether Nikita might face federal charges related to terrorism. Prosecutors declined to comment, stating only that the FBI had been involved extensively during the investigation. For the families of the victims, the guilty plea provided certainty. There would be no surprises, no acquittal, no chance that Nikita could walk free due to a technicality. The legal process would now focus solely on sentencing. But even with the case seemingly resolved, one question continued to linger. How did a teenager with good grades, supportive parents, and a stable home environment become capable of something so extreme? To answer that, investigators looked beyond the crime itself and into the dangerous online world that had quietly shaped Nikita's beliefs. As the legal case against Nikita Casup came to a close, investigators were left confronting a deeper and more unsettling issue. This was not just a family tragedy, it was a warning. Authorities believe Nikita's actions were driven by extremist ideology developed largely online. Long before the murders, he had been communicating with anonymous users on platforms like Telegram and TikTok, engaging with content tied to accelerationism, the belief that violent acts can and should be used to collapse society and governments. The FBI identified repeated references to the Order of the Nine Angles, a violent extremist network that promotes terrorism, white supremacist beliefs, and chaos as a political strategy. Messages recovered from Nikita's devices showed admiration for mass violence and discussions about future attacks. In his manifesto, Nikita allegedly wrote that assassinating political leaders would inspire others and prove that systemic collapse was possible. He framed violence not as a crime, but as a tool. Investigators say the murders of his parents were part of that progression. By killing them, he gained access to money, transportation, and freedom, resources he believed were necessary to continue his plans. The $14,000 in cash, the stolen jewelry, the Bitcoin transactions, and the discussions about drones and explosives all pointed in the same direction. This was not a spontaneous act of rage, it was preparation. What makes the case especially disturbing is how invisible the threat appeared from the outside. Teachers described Nikita as polite and hardworking. Classmates saw him as quiet but normal. At home, there were no public signs of abuse, neglect, or instability. Even federal intervention in 2023 did not prevent what followed. Experts warn that this pattern, online radicalization paired with outward normalcy, is becoming increasingly common. The internet allows extremist ideologies to spread quietly, reinforcing beliefs in isolated echo chambers without obvious warning signs. Nikita never explained his motives directly to investigators. He chose silence in the interrogation room and admitted guilt in court without elaboration. The full why may never be known. What is known is this: two people lost their lives inside a home where they believed they were safe. A teenager destroyed his own future, and a community was forced to confront how easily radical ideas can turn into real-world violence. As Nikita Casup awaits sentencing, the judge will decide whether he will ever be eligible for release, a decision that will shape the rest of his life. For the victims' families, no sentence can undo the loss. But the case stands as a stark reminder: behind closed doors and glowing screens, dangerous ideologies can grow, even in the most ordinary of places.